Hello and welcome to Voices of BlueScope, the podcast where we go behind the scenes of BlueScope to meet the people who create strength every day. I'm your host, Martin Feld. Thank you for joining us. In this instalment, we're featuring a conversation with Vicki Woodley, Manager External Affairs at New Zealand Steel, who reflects on 60 years of operations at the company. Vicki herself has worked for an impressive 37 of those 60 years. Although it's impossible to cover everyone and everything over the course of a company's entire history in only half an hour here, Vicki draws modestly on her extensive personal experience in employee and community engagement to explain the narrative and national significance of New Zealand Steel, along with the resilience of its people and its role within the broader BlueScope group. Let's cross to her interview now.
My name is Vicki Woodley. I started with New Zealand Steel almost 37 years ago now. What brought me to New Zealand Steel at the time, I had members of my family working here who always really enjoyed working here, and living in Waiuku. New Zealand Steel was the biggest employer. Both my girls were at school. My youngest daughter was 5 when I started, so I was a stay-at-home mum until she was 5, and then I decided that it was time for me to look for a job.
And that job was at the local industry, New Zealand Steel?
It was actually on what we call the Stage 2 development at New Zealand Steel. So it was at the time when the rolling mills were being commissioned, so the hot and cold rolling mills, it was the Stage 2 development of New Zealand Steel. And at that time, I worked for the New Zealand Steel Development Group. So I came for 6 weeks as a filing clerk, so I came out here and I filed every piece of paper, actually, every piece of correspondence and minutes and everything for New Zealand Steel Development. And I had to do several copies, which filled the entire meeting room. And I had to do them in date order and pile them miles high. They went right up to the window, actually. And so I did that for 6 weeks while someone else was on leave. And at that time, I wasn't quite sure what I would do. And at the end of 6 weeks, I came across to New Zealand Steel, to the personnel department at the time, and sat there and said that, I'd like to see if there were any opportunities at New Zealand Steel. And as luck would have it, there was an opening for the company secretary at that time. So the company lawyer, his secretary had left quite quickly, and they were looking for someone to take her place. So you could say I was in the right place at the right time, because I started the following day.
You paint a great picture, and I love that idea of the paper, like towering this building high. It's a very different time. What was it like in New Zealand, in Waiuku at this time? What were people's impression of the industry, and how did you feel going into this job, as you just explained, having to go and start this 6-week stint, coming from, being with your family at home?
I was excited to come, and I think the reason I was excited was because, my dad was a steel worker, so my dad worked at New Zealand Steel. We relocated from Auckland to Waiuku so that Dad could work out at the Waikato North Head mine site. My brother worked here, my husband at the time worked here, my father-in-law worked here, so I had a lot of family members who worked here, and my experiences in the community, because I was active with a lot of community things. So I was on the school PTAs and the kindy, support groups. So I mixed with a lot of New Zealand Steel people, I guess, and also people who had benefited from New Zealand Steel being in this community. So a lot of those charitable groups or schools or kindergartens had benefited from New Zealand Steel, either in a monetary way by supporting buildings and different events they were having, or in-kind support from people at New Zealand Steel who voluntarily gave their time to support those groups. And I liked what I saw the company doing in our community.
So is it fair to say from what you've just said that there wasn't the company and the community, they were inextricably linked? They fed off each other?
Yes, they did. And I think, as I reflect back, probably those were great years. The company built 350 company houses. And we lived in one of those company houses. I first lived with my parents in one, and then when I married, I lived with my family in a company house. And part of that thinking around that time was to make sure that New Zealand Steel people became part of the community, that we, and we had our own little community, I guess, in those company houses. There were lots of events and lots of social things that happened there as well. So you very quickly became part of the community, and we're just all one, really.
Wonderful. Where did your career go from there? How did you develop in your role at the company?
It's been an interesting career, really, and I always think, I've never limited my future by thinking in the past. So for me, whenever opportunities have come up, I've said, well, I'll have a go. Not sure how well I'll go, but I'll have a go, and I'm keen to learn. I'll go and learn. So my career started, as I say, for the company secretary. After a while, I then moved into the general site reception role, actually, which was in the main administration building. So I worked there for a little while. And then I moved into the executive assistant roles for some of the general managers, and that just evolved. I worked for one, and then as they left, and then other ones came along. So I worked in different parts of the business. So, the rolling and finishing part under Des Morrison, I learnt then a lot about working with the Japanese and the Chinese around the iron sand sales and different markets there. Then moved across and worked for John Nuttall. So that was, in the IT area, in the engineering field, so it sort of progressed, and I just kept working for the general managers over many years. So I got to know them all and learnt something from everyone, actually. It's been a great experience.
Just in what you said to me then, you brought up iron sands. Now, that's a very interesting point for New Zealand. For people who are listening and don't really know what that means, can you explain the significance of iron sands in New Zealand and its steel industry?
So the New Zealand steel process uses a direct reduction process, and it exists nowhere else in the world, actually, that local iron sands are extracted literally from the beaches, if you like. So it's black sand, and the iron content, or the titanamagnetite, was proved to be very high and suitable for making steel. So our process is still unique in the world at using iron sand in the direct reduction process to make steel, to make iron and steel.
And when you were doing all these different roles, getting exposure to different departments, did you ever expect that you would develop such an intimate or expert knowledge in the actual manufacturing process? What are those, when you reflect, what are some of those lessons that, or those challenges that you reflect on in your career in growing up with this industry?
I think probably from outside the gates, you're not quite sure what happens inside the gates. So once you start working for the company, and I guess I was fortunate that my dad worked for Waikato North Head, so the mining operation. So I sort of understood the process there, because school groups were able to come through for tours, and I got to see where Dad worked. So I understood what the iron sand was used for, and also the importance of the relationships with the local iwi, or the local Maori people, around respecting the cultural values, that we as a company, but also as a person growing up in New Zealand, you understand the significance of some of what water means to Maori people and the land. So the fact that we were taking iron sand from taking the sand, it was, I've always enjoyed the fact that we are so respectful to rehabilitating and working with iwi to make sure that those cultural sensitivities are always front of mind. And then coming across to the steelmaking side of the business, it's fascinating when you come through these gates, because everything's so much bigger than you think. The technology out here, I don't know, it's just mind-blowing, really. And I think, I'm always in awe when I see young people come out and they come for the tours, and you can sort of see as they first come, they think, oh, yeah, and they come through the gates. But by the time they've been through the plant, they can't help but be inspired by the size of the machinery, the innovation, I guess. The making steel is not as easy as you think, I guess.
When you walk out now into the industrial area, into the plant, what strikes you now? What things are still unique or interesting, even though you've seen it for some time?
I think it's still the sheer size and might and sounds and the heat. It really is. We sort of talk about the strength of steel and all those things, but you can't help but feel that when you're in the plant. And for me, I love to see the camaraderie that happens in teams. You go into pulpits and have a chat to people in their lunchrooms and stuff, and you're coming from the offices into their space. So I always really enjoy when you can get in there and have a chat with them and actually see what keeps them coming here every day, and what's unique about their jobs, because every job is unique out here and the opportunities are endless. I came for 6 weeks, and 37 years later I'm still here and still enjoying coming to work every day. There hasn't been a day where I've thought I just don't want to go, because there's always something to see and do here.
That's marvelous. And talking about unique jobs, back to your job, back to your career path, what led to your current position here in working with external affairs? And for people who go, well, what's external affairs? Can you explain all the various aspects of your role now and what keeps you coming to work, as you said?
So a couple of things that have always in my life, I think, been important are people and words. I love both those things. So I love to write, and I love having relationships and meeting people and learning about different cultures and different people. So when I was working as an executive assistant, my manager at the time was about to retire. And so I talked to him a little bit about what I wanted to do, or where I saw some things that I thought I could do quite well. And so one of those things was around communication and engaging with our people. So for me, at that time, I was helping put together the monthly newsletter, which was called Sanskrit. And so I was just helping, put together little stories, and you almost become like a journalist, I guess, keeping your ear to the ground. And when you're in meetings and you hear different things, you think, well, that would be a great story. So I think that sort of triggered that side of me that I get a lot of pleasure from, I guess, telling people stories. So I put my hand up and I said, that's something that I think I'd really love to do. We didn't have a public affairs or external affairs or corporate affairs person at New Zealand Steel at that time. So Mike Archer from BHP or BlueScope in Australia came across for a few weeks, and he came across to look at what our internal communications were, what our external communications were, where corporate affairs could help us, I guess, as a company. And I spent a lot of time with Mike, and I put my hand up and said, how do I become that person? What do I need to do? Where do I get some training? I'll go to some courses, I'll learn some stuff. And Mike gave me some great advice at that time, actually. And he said, there are a lot of courses you can do, Vicki, of course, but the most important one is common sense. And I think that was great advice. And staying out of the newspaper as much as possible. You don't want to be the headline in the newspaper for the wrong reasons.
That is good advice. You mentioned along the way before working with local iwi or Maori populations. What did you learn along the way of interfacing with that community through your external affairs role? Because there's employees, there's the industry, but that's a significant group. What can you say about that?
For me, being part of working with iwi has always been something that's quite close to my heart. And I guess, a lot of my friends in school, were from Ngāti Te Ata, which is the local iwi tribe in Waiuku. So I grew up with those people as well. So we were all friends. So for me, it sort of became quite easy in my community relations and iwi relations kind of role to go out and just have a cup of tea with people and just sit and chat to them, and that's all it takes really. Is it's spending time, it's understanding what their values are, what's important to them, what's important to us, and how we can work together. Because at the end of the day, it's always about people, and it's always about having some time. You can't get back time, and you can't take back what you've said. So sometimes learning from the past helps us to create the future. So for me, I'm always keen to learn. I learned it at school and I learned it in my friendships, but actually being taken back and really learning about the history of the iwi has been really important for me. to be able to do my job as I do.
That's great. And sitting here recording with you, I'm sitting in Wollongong, Australia. Australia has its own difficult past with colonisation, as many nations around the world do. And you talked about learning from that past. What lessons do you think you've learned, or even more broadly, how do you think New Zealand Steel has learnt and improved by interfacing with the Maori community and local iwi? What do you think New Zealand Steel has changed for the better as a result of that dialogue?
I think there's the understanding that there's different levels of engagement. So while there might be sometimes conflict going on or disagreements about different things, at the heart of it, it's always about the people. So you know, when you work with the iwi, for them, very important that New Zealand Steel is an important industry to this community. It has literally put food on tables and roofs, you know, houses and shelter and all sorts of great things the company's done. But giving young people jobs or employing local people where we can has been something that I think the company has done really well. And I think right back to when the company was formed, those early discussions with iwi way back then were around where we can, we will employ local people. And, you know, and I think the company's been true to that. You know, I think, you know, over the years, of course, there's disagreements and different things, but the respect with which the processes now have around, you know, if ever there are what we call koiwi, or those are human remains, so bones, if you know, bones are found at the mining operation, there's a very respectful process around how to deal with that. And that's something that was developed with iwi and with the company. So there's been a lot of those collaborative sort of things that have come together. It's not the company saying this is how things will be done, or iwi saying this is how things will be done. It's like, we need to work together. We're doing the good for the community. We are part of this community, as are you, and really important. And we don't lose sight of the role of either of us, but we do have different touch points. So, you know, we do have the chief to chief engagements, which is Robin, our chief executive, with Ricky, the chief of Ngāti Te Ata, and those that's a very cordial relationship. But we also have, you know, the land, you know, so out at Maioro or Waikato North Head Mining, you know, there's some discussions around the land ownership and different things that iwi are still trying to litigate for themselves with the Crown. So those relationships, that's different again. And then we have, you know, the community sort of engagement relationship. So we try and keep those relationships, different touch points, I guess.
That's a really comprehensive explanation. You mentioned in the course of that explanation things to do with putting food on the table, things like jobs for the local community. And you also mentioned Robin, who's a leader. I want to touch on those points as well. Can you talk a little bit more about job opportunities? Because I'm aware that you help with things like cadetships, for example. What does that mean to New Zealand Steel over the course of its history?
Over the course of history, we've had apprenticeships and we have graduate programs. But Robin, I think the insight of Robin has been fantastic, and the support from Robin. We have a cultural advisor, Vicki Jakeman, and Vicki and I have worked together. Well, I've known Vicki for most of my life, but we've worked together probably for 25 years in some capacity, always just as a in-kind support to me, really, just to advise me at different times. Vicki's now actually a New Zealand Steel casual employee, which is great. So over the years, we've talked about in our community and in many communities in New Zealand, young people will go to school and they'll get to maybe year 11 or year 12 and they don't really know what they want to do. Traditionally, coming to work at New Zealand Steel, young people at like 18, there wouldn't be many unless you were an apprentice coming in. Operators tend to be, you know, people who've had a couple of more years experience or whatever, other people who come and work here. So Robin and I have talked over a long time with Vicki and others around how can we create that pathway for young people who have shown real leadership and resilience, often in quite challenging family environments, to still shine in their school or in their marae? How can we help those young people to say there is a pathway for employment? You don't have to go to university, you don't have to become an apprentice, but we're creating this pathway that we've called a cadetship, where you can come in and join the company. And we're actually kicking off a pilot program now, actually, as part of our 60 years. So we're about to have 2 young people come into the cadetship program, and we'll follow their progress through. But part of the great thing for them, I think, is the opportunities are endless. So we actually met with them yesterday, and it's so inspiring to meet with young people who say, we'll do whatever we need to do, and we just want to get on in life, and we're ready, and they're open to every opportunity that will come their way, and there will be a lot of opportunities for them, and also they'll teach us. So I talk to them about, every year we celebrate Te Reo Māori with Māori Language Week. So we'll be looking to those young people to guide us with some of that, so that those cultural parts of them can be embedded with us, and it just becomes who we are.
It would be wonderful to see a lot of those people who've come on as cadets growing in their careers and seeing them on the plant. Do you have an opportunity to run into people much along the way?
I do. So this will be the first time that we've had a cadet program of the younger ones coming through that pathway straight from high school, if you like. It's always wonderful. We've got so many examples of young people who've come in as apprentices who have now gone on, and they're team leaders and superintendents, and their stories are great. They've come through the local high school, they've gone through their apprenticeship program, and they've learnt on the job here, and they've become wonderful tradespeople who are then training the next generation coming through.
It's really important to hold on to that company knowledge. And what I want to know as well about leadership, for example, you've mentioned Robin, you've mentioned his interface with, as you said, the chief-to-chief element. What can you talk about when it comes to other leaders over time at New Zealand Steel? What's been the role of leaders, how they've interfaced with the community? What's your memory of that?
I think if I reflect back on my time here, there's been 13 chief executives during my time. And when I first started the business, Sir John Ingram had just retired. So he'd just retired just prior to me starting. And John Ingram was known as a man of the people. So he was New Zealand Steel's chief executive maybe for 20 years, I think it was. So John, he was an amazing person, big in stature, but also big in heart. So if you talk about John Ingram at New Zealand Steel, people still know who that is, and they know who it is because even on Christmas Day, John Ingram would come to New Zealand Steel because he said, if the people are working, then I need to be working. And he'd come out and just say Merry Christmas to people. So, John had a real passion for people, but also a passion for the business. And he went on to do great things in the iron and steel industry after he left New Zealand Steel. But because each of the leaders, if I reflect back on those 13 leaders, at the time, each of them came with such a great skill set that we needed at that time. So, during those turbulent times, we had Lindsay Ferguson, a chief executive who had come from Mobil. And so he came in and he had great tenacity, I guess, and ability to lead a business through troubled times, because they were very troubled times for this business. So each one who came through just brought different things with them. People will remember Lance Coburn from Australia. So Lance was our first Australian chief executive, and Lance had the ability to remember everyone's name. I don't know how he ever did that, but, whenever you talked to Lance, he remembered your name and he remembered your children's names. And, he was just one of those people. So, there have been wonderful managers and leaders through the time who, when you reflect back, you think, gosh, they were really selected carefully, because the skill set they brought in to lead the teams at different times was exactly what we needed.
Now, I can understand that you're thinking about a lot of this all the time, because in your role, you're talking about the history of New Zealand Steel. You're part of those events and that organisation for 60 years of New Zealand Steel in 2025. Were you also involved with earlier anniversaries or milestones, whether it be 50 years or other projects like that? Have you done this before?
Yes, I have. So, for our 50th year in 2015, Andrew Geary was here at that time. We were going through a difficult time. It was a difficult financial time. So at that time, again, while you want to do things in great, you want to have a great big event or things. You always have to be mindful of the costs and the perception of overspending on things. But we took the opportunity at that time to write our history. So we worked with an author to write the New Zealand Steel's history. And so the book is called True Grit, and it's the survival and success of New Zealand Steel. And it's funny because it took a while to come up with that title, like the author and the working group that I was part of. It just ended up evolving and being the perfect title, and it's the same now. You could say that 60 years ago that could have been the title of the book, and even now. And it was a great process because in writing that book, we did manage to interview Sir John Ingram before he had passed. So it's lovely that he got to read through some of the earlier chapters, and we interviewed him and most of the past presidents and chief executives were interviewed. So hearing people's stories through the years it was a great thing to put that book together, I think.
That's very cool that you got to be part of that. And the thing that I find cool, if not also a little bit amusing, is that you write that book, you collaborate on that. I mean, the authors put their stamp on it, but history doesn't stop, right? That book is now from 10 years ago, and history has continued to be made. You're part of it, the community's part of it, the employees are part of it. So now when you think about the last 10 years and what's happening in your role and everything at the company now, what elements of more recent history are you more excited about today? What's happening at the company that's worth mentioning on a kind of historical recording such as this one?
Well, I think there's been some great steps forward, I guess. If you think about a company that's often, lived under a cloud, would New Zealand Steel survive? Would it not? In the earlier days, lots of troubled times. I think it's almost like the tide has turned and the stars have all aligned last year, or a couple of years ago for New Zealand Steel, in the fact that there were opportunities for us to then install, to be part of New Zealand's biggest decarbonisation project by installing an electric arc furnace. And it sort of sounds easy to say that, that we're in the middle of that now. The electric arc furnace is being installed now, and we're all getting excited for cold commissioning in December this year. But if I really reflect back on what it took to get that decision over the line, again, I think that visionary leadership and skill set that we have in Robin is exactly what we needed at that time, to be able to engage at the highest level with prime ministers and ministers of the Crown, with the chair of the board, the board of directors, to be able to convince everybody that installing an electric arc furnace in these times was a good idea, was a big challenge. So, yeah.
That's amazing. So there's a real push for a different way of working, a sustainable future. And when we think about that future, when you're meeting with people in the community, maybe catching up with family, or maybe you're at a barbecue and people say, so what's the deal with, New Zealand Steel? What's happening there? How do you describe the company and where it's going? How do you break it down for people?
Well, I think it's still a company, it was originally built on groundbreaking innovation and grit and determination. And I think looking forward and where we are now, it's an amazing company that's embracing innovation and, the AI aspects coming in, and so many young, brilliant minds, which the company has been fortunate to have all through its 60 years, actually. The most brilliant of minds working here, I guess, those young engineers and those people with such vision that, it is an amazing industry that, keeps on going for the good of people and for the good of this country. Without a domestic steelmaker in this country, we saw that during COVID, what happened, not being able to look after your own country is not a good thing. You really need to have that capacity in country.
And of course, a company is more than any one person. And you've been with the company, as you said, for 37 years, and you're very modest and generous in referring to so many people who you've worked with along the way, and so many people who support or work with or even conflicted with the company from the community. When you think about your career, what's happening now, your future, and even this very podcast recording as an act of history, how do you think about your legacy, or how would you like to be remembered with your role at New Zealand Steel family, what it means to have been entrenched in the community? What does it mean to you?
New Zealand Steel has been a really big part of my life. So for me, I've always had a sense of pride working here, and I always feel good. I go home feeling good about things that we do. Part of when celebrating our 50 years, we commissioned a beautiful piece of art in the community. So it was a sculpture that was created by Fred Graham, who sadly passed away in the last few months. So Fred was in his 90s, and we asked him to commission a piece of art in our community that would be, a reflective place for people to sit, and he designed the most beautiful sculpture. And it was three-sided with a lot of 50 birds on it to represent the 50 years, but it was about the past, the present, and the future. So all of those generations of people who've worked at New Zealand Steel or had some connection are part of that sculpture. So for me, when I drive home at night, I drive past that sculpture, and it lights up at night. It's beautiful. So that's something I'm proud of, that's a legacy for our community, and it's something that I'm deeply grateful that I was able to work so closely with Fred, who was the most wonderful man. So, yeah.
That's beautiful. And it's fair to say then that you see yourself reflected in that sculpture?
It's certainly a place. Yeah, I feel proud to have been involved in it, and to have, I guess, sometimes I feel a bit like a dog with a bone, like I want to see things done, and I think that that's one of those things that I'm so proud that we did manage, even in difficult times, to get that done, because it is a beautiful thing for Waiuku to have that piece of art that, is a one-off, and Fred is no longer with us, but that legacy lives on there too. So, yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. And you've been so comprehensive in not only your own history, but the broader history over 60 years of New Zealand Steel. Before we wrap up, is there anything that we haven't discussed, or that you'd like to mention that you can highlight in the podcast?
No, I think for me, if I think back to my own career, the opportunities that come with working for an industry like New Zealand Steel or BlueScope are endless. And what you think you can't do, you really can, given the right environment and the right people. For me, people have always been at the heart of everything I do. So being able to work with people in New Zealand, connecting with people overseas, being part of the corporate affairs team under Jerry Tidd in Australia, the things I've learned from those amazing people stay with you and give you that inner strength to then push to do other things. So I'm just very thankful to have been given these opportunities, and I'm excited for that next generation, like those young cadets who were here yesterday, to be able to sit back and watch their careers is a great thing. The company is going to do that for other young people, which I think is fantastic.
Well, thank you, Vicki, for sparing the time to talk to me today on Voices of BlueScope. It's been wonderful to have you as our key participant, our starring guest, to discuss the history of New Zealand Steel.
My pleasure.
Again, we thank Vicki for her time on the podcast, and we extend our gratitude to all of the amazing, dedicated people who have contributed to the history and success of New Zealand Steel. As always, we encourage you to visit the show notes in your browser or podcast app, where you'll find mentions of further influential people at the company and links to historical videos and photos. Thank you for listening to the Voices of BlueScope podcast, and we look forward to having you for the next episode.